This is E2B, Energy to Business, a podcast by Opportune, where we bring you in-house expertise that serves all energy sectors. We examine emerging financial and technology trends and provide a broad perspective on ways to stay ahead, create opportunities, and execute market strategies.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of E2B, Energy to Business, an Opportune podcast. Thanks so much for joining us on another episode of the show as we continue to break down more important trends, topics, technologies, and everything in between impacting the broader energy industry and, of course, the oil and gas industry as well. I'm your host, Daniel Litwin, the voice of B2B, and I want to make sure that you're pointed in the right direction for more opportune content as we break down today's topic. So make sure you're going to opportune.com for the supplemental article that's informing today's conversation, which I'll reveal here in a second, but also for more content from the team. That includes episodes of the podcast, but also other articles, videos, research, white papers, you name it. You can also find E2B on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, so just hit that subscribe button and you'll have a full catalog of previous conversations as well as notifications when we drop new episodes. So on today's episode of E2B, we're going to be talking Bitcoin. So even if you don't follow Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies more generally, or even the blockchain more generally, it was hard to miss the news over the last several weeks of crypto's crash. What we're seeing is that the value of cryptocurrency is proving quite mercurial, right? It spikes, it plummets, it spikes again, it plummets again, and often in very dramatic fashion in the matter of weeks or even days. And all that instability still has a lot of interest and a lot of folks saying, no, cryptocurrency, you shouldn't lose faith. It is still the future, and this is just growing pains. So as we maneuver some of this ebb and flow in the value of cryptocurrencies and debate what role it will play in the future, we wanted to pose the question of where should E&Ps and other players in the energy industries place some of their focus when considering cryptocurrencies, whether as a currency or as an industry, or even when they consider it as an industry that requires a lot of energy consumption. And we'll expand on all those topics here in a second. So to give us some insights for today's conversation, I'd like to introduce our two guests. We'll go ahead and go down the line. First up, Ryan Dusek. He's director at Opportune. Ryan, great to have you on. How you doing?
Doing great. Glad to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us on E2B. We're also joined today by Cooper Ligon. He's a consultant at Opportune. Cooper, welcome. How are you?
I'm good. I'm glad to be back.
Yeah, it's good to have you back on. I always enjoy getting the second and third timers on E2B. But on Ryan's end, this is your first time on the show. So welcome. And I'm looking forward to, picking both your brains on this topic and seeing how the two of you, approach your analysis on the role of Bitcoin and more generally cryptocurrencies in the larger industry. So we're expanding on an article that the two of you published on Opportune's website. It's titled, Why Renewable Energy Can't Survive Without Bitcoin. You can find that article in our Insights tab on the opportune.com website. Just maneuver there and you will find the piece. We'll also backlink it in the description of the podcast and in the corresponding article. But what I want to do is just get a chance to unpack some of what the two of you were trying to lay out with this article, and then we'll expand on several points. So it seems that there, again, isn't a shortage of headlines today about that ebb and flow of prices for Bitcoin and for all cryptocurrencies, but specifically for Bitcoin, which is the world's largest cryptocurrency. And this is having implications on the broader financial economy and some of the fiscal stability of our nation and really the world. I'm wondering if you can give our audience who may not be super familiar with Bitcoin a brief overview of what Bitcoin is, right? And what cryptocurrency is more broadly and why it's all the rage today, right? Why is there such immense value being placed on cryptocurrencies currently?
Yeah, well, first to answer kind of what is Bitcoin. Bitcoin released a white paper by its anonymous creator, Satoshi Nakamoto, in 2009, I believe, where he said that Bitcoin is a decentralized peer-to-peer version of electronic cash that allows online payments to be sent directly from one party to another without going through a financial institution. I think the white paper went on for 10, maybe 11 pages, but it kind of wrote out this whole theory of Bitcoin. And from there, Bitcoin was created. But I think what you were more asking about was, how do you get Bitcoin? So there's a lot of ways to get it. You can receive it from another person as a payment, like the famous 10,000 Bitcoin pizza in 2010, where they interviewed a guy who paid, I think at its peak, $600 million or something for 2 large pizzas from Pizza Hut, but they were worth nothing back then. You can buy it on an exchange like Coinbase, or what we're going to be more focused on in this podcast and what me and Ryan are trying to specialize in and get a better understanding about, which is the Bitcoin mining. So again, a brief overview of Bitcoin mining. It's done with specialized computers that basically race against each other to guess a complex string of numbers. The winner is rewarded with a block of Bitcoin, and that process, which is proof of work mechanism, is what creates the Bitcoin blockchain and then validates its transaction from other users. Again, as I'm sure we'll get into this later, this is where we've kind of seen a big influx and commercialization of massive Bitcoin mining facilities across the world, especially within Texas. Bitcoin itself is really unique because it's designed to be progressively more difficult to mine by using the halving system, which is where a block of Bitcoin or reward block of Bitcoin is cut in half after a certain number. The most recent halving, I believe, was in May 2020, and it's giving 6.25 Bitcoin per block that's mined. What's cool about this feature is that it induces inflation for Bitcoin's price by obviously reducing the number of Bitcoins in circulation and increasing the demand for the finite amount of Bitcoin, which is 21 million. And because Bitcoin holds a significant value in the market, I think right now it's 21,000, but people are going to hold on and they think it's going to keep going up. These companies are optimizing their mines with top of line equipment, with ASIC miners and top of line, HVAC systems to keep the computers cool. And then also they're going to the ends of the earth to try to find the cheapest energy that they can. And then I think your next question, what's all the rage about? What makes it special? Why do people believe in this internet money? But the easiest way to kind of explain it to someone that doesn't truly understand it or have read into it, it's easy to compare it to the US dollar, which everyone's aware of. So similarly, both are intrinsically worthless, meaning that they have no use apart from being a medium of exchange for goods and services. Both are irredeemable, meaning that they aren't backed by an underlying asset. The USD used to be on the gold standard, meaning that every dollar printed, there was a dollar worth of gold held up in Fort Knox, but now it's simply a promissory note. How Bitcoin and the dollar are different is that the government has a centralized control over the dollar, therefore it has control over its supply, while Bitcoin's big buzzword is that it's decentralized, meaning that there is no central authority controlling it. It's just a peer-to-peer exchange. Bitcoin supply is also pre-programmed, like we talked about, so there will never be more than 21 million Bitcoin in circulation. Unlike the dollar that we've seen, there's inflation, they can just print however much they want. And there's a predetermined trajectory with that halving system that contains the supply of Bitcoin. So theoretically, some guy can't mine it all at once and own it all and therefore make it worthless. So I think one that Bitcoin originally got interesting about was its level of financial privacy. It kind of has a darker path in that with purchasing power, but it allows synonymous digital transactions. And other than peer-to-peer exchanges with cash that we see today, the dollar exchange requires a third party to facilitate that transaction, whether it be Bank of America, American Express, or even Venmo. All of those transactions are recorded, documented, and facilitated through a middleman. And with Bitcoin, like Satoshi Nakamoto wrote, it's a peer-to-peer cash exchange.
I was going to say that I think for me, the big value in Bitcoin is it's really the kind of two things you touched on. It's really centralized, the whole blockchain. I think there's a lot of things that will build off of that in the future. They're obviously working on things now, but I think as we move forward, you'll see more and more of that. And the other one is just really the fixed supply. I don't know anything else that has a fixed supply. So, long term, this really is going to be the bet against inflation. Honestly, I thought it would happen a lot sooner. It looks like it's still being treated as basically like a tech stock or financial asset, but I feel like there's going to be a decoupling probably sooner rather than later. But it may actually be in the next run up. Because I am a believer. I do think it'll keep going for quite a while.
Yeah. I mean, we've even seen different opportunities for Bitcoin to rise, but yeah, like we talked about, the volatility, I think, keeps a lot of people away from it. It makes it look, like you said, like a tech stock or something like that. But the blockchain technology that is being built on top of it is, yeah, I agree, extremely interesting.
One of the most important connections that cryptocurrency has with the energy industry is just quite literally the energy spend that it takes to produce value for cryptocurrencies. The most common method for providing value, like Cooper explained, is mining. And mining requires a proof of work consensus mechanism. And proof of work means that to provide value, several computers are needing to run processes and solve puzzles and, in effect, create value for cryptocurrency. Now, naturally, running all those computers, especially at scale, is going to use a lot of energy. So by nature, Bitcoin mining is extremely energy intensive. And right now it relies on cheap energy sources. Bitcoin, in some recent studies, it's estimated that it consumes 150 terawatt hours of electricity annually, which is more than the entire country of Argentina. And it emits some 65 megatons of CO2 into the atmosphere annually. I'm wondering if y'all can briefly explain then, again, why so much energy is needed to power cryptocurrency mining operations and to run proof of work consensus mechanisms. And if you could also explain how that power is sourced and utilized.
Yeah, I think Bitcoin mines come in all shapes and sizes. Like we talked about before, back in early adoption phases of Bitcoin, the halving was so great that people were mining Bitcoin in the garages with their old, home PC, but now we're seeing a huge influx of commercialization. So whenever we're talking about this, I'm assuming we're talking about the top of the line commercial warehouses, like the ones we see in Rockdale or any of the other 10 large scale ones that are lined up to come to Texas. One that I've read upon previously was the Helios facility that's just outside of Lubbock that plans to have 50,000 servers executing nearly 4 quintillion calculations. So that's 4 billion billions. That's 4 billion billions every second. So with these ASICs going as fast as they can, they get hot, like really hot. So the ASIC heat has to be controlled to prevent it from shutting down and sometimes even catching fire. So these companies are trying to find the best ways they can to keep their servers cool, to permanently run them like stadium grade HVAC systems, or even keeping servers in dielectric fluid tanks. And how those work is they capture the heat from the computers and they pump that hot fluid outside into a cooling system, and they pump back in cool fluid back into the tank. And for how long the power is sourced and utilized, the Bitcoin Mining Council's Q1 data for 2022 came out and claimed that roughly 58.4% of Bitcoin mining is powered by renewable energy. This percentage is mainly driven by Bitcoin miners' thirst for the cheapest energy they can find, and they're willing to go anywhere for cheap energy. Like we see, the Helios was built on a former cow pasture in the middle of West Texas, near a massive wind farm or near a hydroelectric dam that only has a few towns that are currently able to consume its massive daily energy output. So yeah, they take a lot of energy, but I think because Bitcoin mines are run like a business, they're trying to find kind of more unique renewable outlets to source that energy.
I got to localize a little bit here too. I'm recording this from Dallas, Texas, and we're actually seeing Texas become an incredibly attractive market for Bitcoin miners. Cryptocurrency's thirst for energy continues to grow because of, even with the instability, a consistent amount of optimism and vision for how the blockchain, even more generally, but just cryptocurrencies, can disrupt and provide a lot of financial liberty for individuals, for companies, and even whole nations, right? So with that, comes more mining operations, and with that comes a race to build larger facilities to cash in on this proverbial 21st century gold rush, right? So what would you say is making Texas an attractive market for Bitcoin miners? I'll throw in even more timely news. I'm sure folks saw that recently Fort Worth, which is our sister city here in Dallas, Fort Worth was the first city to invest in its own public Bitcoin mining infrastructure in the United States, which was a major milestone in validating proof of work, consensus mechanisms, and just cryptocurrencies in general, to get that kind of buy-in from a municipality. So again, what would you all say is making Texas such an attractive market for the Bitcoin miners compared to, say China, right? Which as of recently, maybe a year or so ago, they were the leader in Bitcoin mining. So give us your perspectives.
I was going to say probably the main draw, at least it used to be, is when the fracking was kind of blowing. There was an excess amount of natural gas in the system, so much so that companies weren't actually able to flare at all. Flaring is basically just when you're burning off the excess. There was no place for it. They would do what they could, try to get government to get them or to ease up on any of the restrictions that they had. But all in all, there was just a lot of gas coming out of the ground. Well, the mining companies caught wind of this as basically, hey, this is technically free for the most part because they're just burning it off anyway. So a couple of guys and said, hey, why don't we move out to the Permian Basin, take a look at what's out there, work some deals, and got some pipeline in place to basically run it directly to their portable mining facility. And I think that's kind of what we've been seeing. And as soon as the environment gets to a point where we can actually start drilling again or continue drilling or kind of open up things, I think at that point we'll see a lot more, or there'll definitely be a bigger push towards Texas. And then, that may or may not be a good thing at some point. The grid is getting a little congested the way it is.
Yeah, I think you mentioned China. So China used to dominate Bitcoin mining with something like 75% of the world's Bitcoin miners at its peak. But China's government announced that it would kind of cut off all power to miners due to concerns that it was undermining its climate reduction goals, because they were mostly just burning coal to power these mines. So after that, we saw the search begin for the best places to create crypto mines. And I think many landed in Texas, like Ryan said, for our quote unquote Goldilocks situation. I think that there are three main reasons, which should be the state's energy infrastructure, which is ERCOT allows for access to cheap power from its deregulated power market, its growing energy source from renewables, particularly wind energy in West Texas, and then also its supportive policy being backed by current policymakers. We've got tweets out from Governor Abbott talking about Texas is the place to be, and Ted Cruz, a senator, has openly said multiple times about his belief in cryptocurrency within the state and it being new power in that industry. So there's a lot of pros for people whenever they're choosing places to land, and I think we're seeing a lot of big companies choose Texas for the reasons we just said.
I'm sure our audience is asking, what kind of power is being used to fuel, pun intended, the growing Bitcoin mining side of the cryptocurrency industry? We mentioned it already. Bitcoin right now, its mining relies on cheap energy sources, and crypto miners use a variety of power sources for their mining operations. That includes hydroelectric, natural gas, coal, wind, oil, solar, nuclear. There are even some geothermal Bitcoin mining operations out there. So let's connect the dots, team. What do you think the relationship between oil and gas producers and crypto miners is, both in the short term and the long term? And do you find that a relationship there is sustainable, right? Should oil and gas producers be seeking to support this industry, or is there focus on clean energy, green energy, right? And maybe transitioning away from oil and gas, impacting some of the potential relationships to be made with that industry. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I believe that the relationship between oil and gas producers and crypto miners is currently mutually beneficial. For each mining operation, the energy source is the biggest question to me. If the situation is a win-win, then I believe those relationships will always be positive and beneficial. For instance, I kind of firmly believe that using natural gas flaring as an energy source for Bitcoin mining is a win-win for all players involved. We're seeing large corporations like ExxonMobil working with a mining company up in the North Dakota region to power some mobile generators that are using obviously natural gas to run Bitcoin mining servers. There are also some more local players like Giga Energy, which was started by some former classmates of mine at Texas A&M, who run a vertically integrated Bitcoin mining company that builds, operates, and sells these boxes of portable facilities. So those guys started out using gas flares on some family land just to have a little proof of concept to see if it worked, and now they can manufacture these compact data centers for not only on-grid but off-grid use flare. And I think that off-grid use flare is a really interesting point where we're seeing flared gas that has no opportunity to get pumped in. I think those relationships will always be beneficial as long as it's profitable for Bitcoin mining companies to be out there. However, I think me and Ryan can agree. I'm not too sure how I feel about Bitcoin mines just being plugged into the energy grid and sucking up some 6 gigawatts of energy around the clock. So, Ryan, if you want to talk a little bit about the grid.
I think the relationship that the miners are going to have with the energy companies or the fuels, it's required. It's going to be necessary. The thing you don't get with the renewables is certainty, right? The wind blows when it blows and the sun's shining, or it's dark, it might be cloudy. You just don't get the consistency you would from natural gas. You're basically flipping on a switch and generation turns on, so you're up and running. So you really can't escape that. Now there's always going to be some mix, right? You'll have 20% renewables, you'll have 5% coal, big proportion of natural gas, but wherever you're located at, they're going to have some mix of energy. At some point, you're going to be connected to the grid as well, and if they're not already, in some way they'll have to be. The miners moving into Texas trying to tap into this natural gas, this excess gas, that was kind of a new thing, right? Kind of trying to be innovative, look for the cheaper input cost. But once all these miners, say for instance, they all move to, they do move to Texas, or a majority of them do, we're at a point now where kind of supply meets demand, and we're at the peak. So anything in Texas is, especially during the summer months, it's really going to be an issue. We're already starting to see some blackouts. We're seeing huge prices. Residential, your normal bill, those are going up, and they're looking pretty bad. Neighborhood recently, we had a lot of people asking me questions about that, like I did it or something. But the renewable piece of it, everyone wants to go green. Obviously it's a better way to go. I just don't know that it's scalable. There's a lot of issues with trying to be 100% green because of that intermittent energy flow. So at some point the miners would like to do that, but right now I think it's still going to be, everyone's going to be tied to fossil fuels, at least until we have some new technology, kind of the next best thing to either batteries, large scale batteries that are scalable to act like they're a utility to an extent, or everyone's going to be forced to have one for their residents. You'll have to see what the latest and greatest is, but right now you're just not going to escape it, no matter how much you want to cry foul over fossil fuels.
Yeah, to give a little bit more insight to the listeners, if we look back a couple of weeks ago, on July 11th, ERCOT released statements basically begging residents to crank their AC up to 78 and hold off on doing anything that required power for the entire day. just because Texas was so hot and the grid, like you said, was at its absolute maximum. ERCOT's forecasted demand that day was 79,671 megawatts with 80,083 dispatchable or available megawatts. So that left ERCOT with a measly 412 dispatchable megawatts as wiggle room, or if you look at that, that's 0.005% of their total dispatchable megawatts able to give out. So Texas can already barely handle a hot summer day as it is now, not including the 10 plus Bitcoin mines that are expected to come online in the near future plugged into the grid. So the current argument that people are saying is that, Bitcoin mines will simply kind of flip off the switch when it's no longer economic to keep mining with the prices. But that's also whenever Bitcoin is at $22,000, right? So I can't imagine everyone that's in the Bitcoin space obviously thinks it's going to go up, or else they wouldn't be in the space. But what happens whenever Bitcoin goes up to $100,000? Does that megawatt price just keep going up and keep rising until it hits a number where literally no Texan can afford it and no Texan home wants to pay to keep their AC cold because the Bitcoin mines are running up the price? It's going to be very interesting to see how Texas legislature and maybe ERCOT handles